There's one recording from the basement of the Portland Public Library that the staff won't play anymore because no one can explain the voice captured on it. I've listened to it myself, and even now, thinking about it makes the hair on my arms stand on end. It isn't loud, it isn't screaming, and it isn't trying to grab your attention, yet it feels deliberate, as though someone or something wanted to be heard. The library, with its tall shelves, worn wood, and dim lights, usually carries only the soft shuffle of pages or the echo of a visitor's footsteps. But in that basement, past the locked doors and narrow staircases, the sound appeared, recorded by equipment meant only to monitor temperature and security. It shouldn't have been there. Nothing in the building should have made that noise. And yet, when it played back, it filled the empty space as though the walls themselves were speaking. I had taken a part-time archivist position at the Portland Public Library because it offered quiet. Crowds made my chest tighten, and the calm of the basement, surrounded by shelves of old books, manuscripts, and dusty files, felt safe. The air was always cool, heavy with the scent of paper and aged bindings, and on rainy days, the sound of water dripping from the eaves above added a rhythm that was almost soothing. The basement itself was narrow, lined with stacks of records and boxes, lit by long, warm library lamps that created pockets of light amid the shadows. I would move slowly down the aisles, my fingers tracing the spines of old volumes, careful not to disturb the stillness. Each corner held the history of the city, forgotten letters, ledgers, maps, and manuscripts, a quiet world where the noise of the outside disappeared entirely. It was easy to lose track of time in this space, wrapped in the soft hush of the archives, surrounded by objects that had survived generations. In that silence, I felt steady, as though the weight of anxiety that followed me elsewhere had been left behind at the staircase leading down into this calm. I was arranging a box of old city ledgers when I first noticed it. A faint humming, almost imperceptible at first, threading through the basement. I paused, listening, convinced it must be plumbing or the hum of an electrical line. But as I moved deeper into the stacks, the sound seemed to follow, growing just enough to be noticed, yet remaining impossible to trace. I walked slowly down the aisle, scanning the ceiling where pipes and conduits ran overhead. The lights flickered intermittently, though I attributed that to the building's age. The humming continued, persistent yet subtle, like a song I could not name, weaving through the shadows and between the shelves. I told myself it was mechanical, some quirk of an old building settling into the night. And yet, there was a cadence to it, a rhythm that didn't belong to wires or water, as though the basement itself was quietly speaking in a tone that only the most attentive ears could hear. The humming changed that evening. It had been soft at first, almost easy to ignore, but now it had a rhythm, deliberate and steady, as though someone or something was pacing along the rows of shelves. I froze in place, the familiar calm of the basement replaced by a tension I couldn't place. The sound moved with a certainty, weaving between stacks, yet when I turned corners, there was nothing there. I mentioned it to one of the other staff members the next morning. She paused, her expression tightening, before admitting she had heard it too, late at night, when the library was empty. Her voice was careful, measured, as though speaking aloud might somehow give the sound substance. That's when I realized this basement held more than quiet. It held a presence that didn't announce itself, didn't knock or tap. It simply existed, moving along the old aisles in a rhythm only the most attentive could catch. I stood still. The sound didn't move away. It moved toward me. My chest tightened as I watched shadows stretch along the dusty floor, shapes of shelving bending in the dim lamplight. I reached instinctively for my notebook, but my hand shook slightly, betraying an unease I wasn't ready to confront. To make sense of what I was hearing, I started reviewing the library's old logs and archival notes. In the margins of typewritten pages between inventory lists and donation records, I found mentions of staff hearing low voices in the basement, reports dating as far back as 1986. I also learned that the basement had once been part of a municipal building, predating the library itself. Its walls held decades of history, layers of construction, renovations, and forgotten corners. The idea that the hum, or the pacing, might be connected to those old foundations began to creep into my mind. Perhaps it was sound echoing through old pipes or footsteps long since past. And yet, as I turned pages of microfilm reels, gloves brushing typewritten sheets, I couldn't shake the impression that someone, or something, was present, keeping pace with me in the quiet, waiting for attention that no one had consciously given. The storm had picked up outside by the time I reached the far end of the basement. Rain hammered against the stone walls, and lightning illuminated the narrow aisles in sudden, bright flashes. The library's fluorescent lights flickered intermittently, throwing shadows that danced across the stacks and boxes. And then the humming returned, sharper this time, almost as if it had grown conscious. It shifted into a tone like a whisper, soft, deliberate, threading between the shelves and around me. My heart thumped in my chest as I pulled out my phone and started recording, desperate for proof, for explanation. The recording captured something I hadn't noticed in the moment. A slow, measured pattern, a cadence that felt like someone saying a name. I played it back quietly, headphones pressed against my ears. It repeated 3 times. My name, then silence. The quiet returned to the basement, but the memory of that sound, carrying a weight I could not name, pressed into me. It was impossible to dismiss, impossible to forget. I began researching the library's history in detail, digging into archived city records and architectural plans. The basement, I discovered, had once housed temporary holding cells in the early 1900s, a fact buried beneath decades of renovation and reorganization. Staff had occasionally mentioned, almost casually, seeing a figure seated in the corner during late-night rounds, just beyond the reach of the lights, watching silently before vanishing when approached. Returning to the recordings and considering the staff reports, it became clear why the library no longer played the audio. What had been captured wasn't mechanical noise, wasn't misfired wiring. It was something that carried intent, focused attention. The basement's quiet spaces weren't empty. They remembered, they responded, and sometimes they spoke. The voice that had called my name was not a trick of the mind. It was tied to the history that remained embedded in the stone and shadows. The recording exists, but it is left unplayed, its presence a memory that refuses to fade. I eventually transferred to another job, leaving the basement behind. I no longer linger in small, enclosed spaces where the quiet feels alive. Even now, the memory of that night stays with me, a reminder that some spaces don't simply echo. They respond, and if you spend long enough in the quiet, if you let yourself be still, they may answer with your name. There's a moment on Interstate 40 outside Flagstaff I still refuse to drive past at night because of the person I saw standing in the road who wasn't supposed to be there. I remember the rain falling in sheets, the highway slick and shining under the headlights, stretching empty in both directions. The kind of darkness that swallows the landscape, where the desert feels wider, lonelier, and colder than it should. And then I saw them, standing perfectly still, just beyond the edge of the road, as if waiting, as if the world itself had slowed to make room for them. In that instant, every instinct in my body told me something was off, though I couldn't explain why. Something about the way they stood, the way the shadows clung to their form, made the ordinary impossible. That night, a simple drive became a memory I've returned to again and again, trying to understand it, and failing each time. I had been on the road for hours, hauling a late-night delivery across the stretches of Interstate 40 outside Flagstaff. It was one of those nights where the rain is almost gentle, just enough to blur the edges of the world, and a thin fog curls over the highway, hiding the desert in a soft gray haze. I've been driving nights for weeks, ever since my life had shifted in ways I couldn't escape. Loss has a way of following you, even behind the wheel, even when the road is empty. I kept telling myself the night shift would help, that the long stretches of asphalt would quiet the thoughts I didn't want to face. The dashboard lights glowed softly in front of me, the needles moving in their slow, familiar rhythm. My hands gripped the wheel a little tighter than usual, a mixture of fatigue and unease settling into my shoulders. Passing a lone fuel station, its fluorescent lights flickering in the drizzle, I felt the weight of isolation more keenly than ever. The desert on either side of the highway rose like silent walls, stretching out into shapes the fog refused to let me recognize. Every shadow seemed to shift as I moved, but when I looked closer, there was only the ordinary cacti, scrub brush, the occasional fence line. And yet, there was a tension in the air, a sense that something was about to intersect with this night I had come to rely on for solitude. I tried to focus on the rhythm of the tires against the wet asphalt, the hum of the engine, anything to keep my mind anchored. But no matter how many miles I put between me and the towns I'd left behind, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was moving towards something I wasn't ready to understand. It was 1:37 in the morning when I first noticed someone standing on the side of the road. I remember the moment with a clarity that hasn't faded, even after countless drives past that stretch of Interstate 40. The rain had slowed to a steady drizzle, the fog thinning just enough that the roadside became faintly visible under the headlights. And then I saw them, standing there, as if they had always been part of the landscape. I slowed the truck instinctively, just enough to get a better look. The figure was still, too still, with an air of calm that made my stomach tighten. I couldn't tell if they were waving, waiting, or simply observing the highway. My mind scrambled for a reasonable explanation. A stranded driver, a hitchhiker, someone trying to cross the road. But as I passed, my eyes catching every movement, the figure vanished. I double-checked the mirrors, scanning the shoulder and the road behind me. Nothing. Just the asphalt stretching endlessly into the fog, unbroken, as if the person had never been there. No footprints in the wet shoulder, no headlights flickering in the distance, no sign that anyone had been standing there at all. My hands tightened on the wheel. The quiet returned instantly, as though the moment itself had been suspended and then erased. For the rest of that night, every turn of the road and flicker of the headlights felt charged with the memory of that figure. I kept thinking I might see them again, maybe further down the highway, but the road remained empty, silent, the fog rolling over the desert like nothing had happened. And yet, in the back of my mind, I knew that whatever I had seen wasn't simply a trick of light or imagination. That night left a trace, a hesitation in my reflexes, a pause in my thoughts, that continues to follow me whenever I drive that highway after dark. I try to shake it off, telling myself I was tired, that the night and the fog were playing tricks on me. I reached for the CB radio, hoping to make contact with another trucker along the route. Anybody out there? I called. Only static answered me, a crackling void that stretched for miles. No voices, no acknowledgement, just the hum of the long highway and the persistent drizzle against the windshield. A few miles later, around mile marker 187, I caught movement on the opposite side of the road. My headlights briefly illuminated the figure standing just beyond the fog, perfectly still. I remember noting the exact time, 2:14 a.m., because it seemed impossible that I could have imagined it twice. The posture was the same, the quiet certainty of someone waiting. I slowed instinctively, heart hammering, but by the time I passed, they were gone again, swallowed by the mist and shadows, leaving no evidence behind. I told myself I must be hallucinating, that exhaustion had caught up with me. But every mile afterward, every road sign, every faint curve in the asphalt reminded me of that fleeting presence. The desert around Flagstaff had an emptiness that pressed against the vehicle, a quiet that made each blink, each turn of the wheel, feel more intense. The longer I drove, the more I felt that something was out there, just beyond the reach of the headlights. Eventually, I pulled into a rest area, hoping to ground myself, to make sense of what I was seeing. The fluorescent lights flickered over empty picnic tables, and the faint smell of wet asphalt and diesel filled the air. I found two other travelers leaning against their car, try to stay warm from the chill that seemed to settle in with the fog. I asked them casually if they had noticed anyone walking along the highway. They exchanged uneasy glances before answering. One of them said quietly, "We thought we heard footsteps around our car, but when we looked, no one was there." A shiver ran down my spine. I laughed nervously, but inside the unease only grew. We were all here in the same stretch of highway, all noticing the same unexplainable things, all feeling the same weight of uncertainty. For a moment, the world outside seemed almost ordinary. The glow of the lights on wet pavement, the distant hum of the passing truck, but the memory of that figure, of the empty highway where it should have been impossible for anyone to appear, lingered like a shadow at the edge of perception. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than coincidence, or tired eyes misreading the fog. Yet deep down, I knew that whatever was out there had a presence beyond explanation. The rain had grown heavier by this point, each droplet tapping against the windshield like a metronome counting down. I was moving cautiously, headlights piercing the fog and puddles on the asphalt, when I saw it again, this time in the middle of the road. The figure stood perfectly still, soaked by the rain, as though waiting for me to stop. I slammed on the brakes, tires squealing and water spraying in sheets. My heart hammered as I watched the figure slowly lift its head, turning toward me. For a brief moment, I could see the shape of a face, or perhaps just the suggestion of one. And then, just like that, it vanished, swallowed entirely by the reflection of my headlights on the wet road. A car behind me swerved to avoid hitting me, honking frantically, and nearly spun off the shoulder. I rolled down my window as the driver, a woman with wide eyes, leaned out shouting, "What happened?" I hesitated, trying to put into words what I had just seen. Someone was standing there, I told her. She blinked and shook her head. "I saw nothing," she said. Her words hung in the air, mingling with the hiss of rain on the asphalt, leaving me questioning if what I had seen had been real, or if the highway itself had conjured it from the fog and darkness. The next day, I found myself at the local police station, compelled to ask if anyone else had reported unusual sightings on the stretch of highway. The officer I spoke to nodded slowly. "You're not the first," he said. "We've had reports going back to the late 1990s. Drivers, mostly at night, have described a figure appearing out of nowhere, always along the same stretch near mile marker 187. He showed me an old file of reports, handwritten statements, radar timestamps, photographs of skid marks, and faded newspaper clippings. One article caught my eye. A pedestrian had been struck in that exact location decades earlier. The accident had been fatal, leaving behind nothing but grief and questions. I drove back that night, tracing the road in my memory, and returned to the spot where I had first seen the figure standing in the middle of the asphalt. The drizzle fell softly now, and the highway was quiet except for the hum of tires on wet pavement. The memory of that night, the way the figure had turned its head, the sudden disappearance, pressed against me. It was impossible to ignore, and yet impossible to explain. I realized then that some moments are preserved, repeated by the road itself, waiting for someone who is willing to see them. I never take that route after dark anymore. The memory of what I saw, the figure, the empty road, the way time seemed to pause, follows me each time I think about it. Highways remember more than traffic. They remember the people who have passed through, the moments that ended too soon, the lives that touched the asphalt and left something behind. Some moments keep repeating, long after the world has moved on, until the night finds someone willing to notice them. And I did. There was one sound that night in Chicago no neighbor could identify, and it wasn't supposed to come from any apartment on my floor. I remember the rain pressing against the windows, the way the hallway lights flickered just enough to make you think they were adjusting to the storm, and how the entire building felt quieter than usual, like it was listening. I had been awake longer than I should have been, staring up at the ceiling in my small apartment, trying to trace the rhythm of that noise. It wasn't footsteps. It wasn't furniture being moved. It wasn't the pipes that sometimes rattled when the temperature dropped. It was something steady, measured, almost patient, and the more I listened, the more I realized it came from a room that shouldn't have produced any sound at all. I was a medical intern back then, living in a small corner apartment on the north side of Chicago. The place wasn't much, just enough room for a bed, a narrow kitchen, and a view of the street 2 floors below, but it worked for someone who spent more time in the hospital than at home. Most nights, I returned close to midnight, walking through the wet sidewalks that reflected the streetlights like long broken lines, the rain falling in thin sheets that turned everything quiet. My routine rarely changed. I dropped my bag on the chair near the door, take off the badge that still carried the faint smell of disinfectant, and sit for a moment without turning on the lights. There was something comforting about letting my eyes adjust slowly to the dark, letting the sound of the rain settle into the room before I moved. It was the only time of day when the world stopped demanding anything from me. The fatigue came in waves, hours of standing, rushing between patients, the steady hum of machines still echoing in my head long after I'd left the building. I wasn't sleeping well during that period. The night shifts made it harder to feel connected to anything outside the hospital. My friends worked daytime jobs. My family lived states away. Most nights, I didn't speak to anyone after leaving work. The silence wasn't loud. It was just constant, the kind that made you notice every small detail in your apartment. On that particular night, the rain felt heavier than usual, tapping gently against the glass in a way that reminded me of someone trying to get my attention without actually calling my name. I remember heating up leftover food, the microwave light casting a soft glow on the counter, and feeling a strange mix of exhaustion and alertness, the kind that comes from being overtired but unable to unwind. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening to the distant traffic, the occasional echo from the hallway, and the steady rainfall outside. Nothing about the evening felt unusual at first. It was the kind of night I had lived through dozens of times in that apartment. Quiet, simple, shaped mostly by routine. But somewhere between setting my phone on a nightstand and leaning back against the headboard, I heard something faint above me. A small sound, a careful sound, something that didn't fit the rhythm of the building. I remember sitting there, letting the warmth from the food settle in, when the rain shifted from a light tap to a steady curtain against the windows. The building had a way of responding to storms, small creaks from the walls, a faint hum in the pipes. But that night, something rose above all of that. At first, it blended in with the rain, a soft rhythm I couldn't place. It sounded like someone taking slow steps across a wooden floor. It caught my attention because of where it came from. The ceiling in that apartment was thick, layered with insulation that usually muted everything from above. Even when the old tenants used to move furniture or walk heavily, I barely heard them. But this sound wasn't muffled. It was clear, a light step, then a pause, then another, moving in a straight line. I set my fork down and listened more closely. I remember holding my breath without thinking, trying to judge whether it was part of the storm. The pattern didn't match the rain. It was too deliberate, too spaced out, like someone pacing from one end of the room to the other. What unsettled me wasn't the sound itself. It was the memory that surfaced with it. The apartment above mine was empty. The tenants had moved out weeks before, and renovation signs had gone up on their door. The workers only came during the day, never at night, never during a storm like this. I leaned back slightly and stared up at the ceiling, watching the faint shift of shadows from the streetlights outside. The steps continued for a while, each one soft but clear enough to feel like someone was right above me, tracing a path I couldn't see. After a few minutes, the sound stopped entirely. No fading out, no gradual slowing, just silence, as if whoever or whatever had been moving simply paused and never took another step. I try to explain it to myself. Buildings make noises. Rain changes how structures settle. Old floors shift under temperature changes. I told myself all of that, but none of those explanations matched what I heard. The part that stayed with me came the next morning. I stopped by the manager's office before heading to the hospital and asked whether any crew had been in the unit above mine during the night. He looked up from his paperwork, shook his head, and said no one had entered that apartment for weeks. I tried to set the whole thing aside after speaking with the manager. It was March 14th, 2018, a Wednesday, and I had a long shift ahead of me. I kept telling myself the noise could have been anything, a change in air pressure, equipment left behind from the renovation work, maybe even a small animal that found a way into the duct system. I ran through every explanation I could think of, and each one felt reasonable enough in daylight. Still, a part of me kept returning to how clear those steps had sounded. They had weight. They had direction. When I got home later that night, the rain had eased into a quiet drizzle. The hallway was empty, the kind of stillness that made every footstep echo. As I was unlocking my door, the woman who lived 2 units down stepped out to get her mail. She looked tired too, the way most people in that building looked during winter. We exchanged a simple greeting, and then she paused, almost as if debating whether to mention something. She said she'd heard movement late the previous night. She didn't use dramatic words, just that one. Movement. She thought the renovation crew had come in unexpectedly, but when she checked the floor earlier that morning, the door to the unit upstairs still had the same taped notice, the same stack of untouched dust around the threshold. Her comment didn't alarm me at first. It just lined up too neatly with what I'd heard. A confirmation, but not the kind I expected. Back inside my apartment, I tried to focus on preparing for the next day, but my thoughts drifted repeatedly to the ceiling. It was quiet, the kind of quiet where even the hum from the refrigerator seemed louder than usual. I stayed awake longer than I intended, scrolling through my phone, letting the hours pass slowly. At 2:11 a.m., I finally set the phone aside and closed my eyes. That was when it happened again. Something moved directly above me. This time it wasn't a step. It was a slow, steady dragging sound, like something being pulled across the floor in a straight line. I opened my eyes immediately, staring up at the ceiling as if I could see through it. The room felt unchanged, calm, the rain barely audible now. But the sound continued for several seconds, unbroken, before stopping all at once. No follow-up noise, no explanation. I sat up and listened, waiting for anything else. The silence that followed didn't feel like the usual quiet of an empty building. It felt deliberate, as if whatever had caused that sound had paused the moment I was fully awake. After the dragging sound that night, I realized I needed something more than memory to make sense of what I was hearing. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I just wanted something I could play back for myself in the morning when the building felt normal again. So on the night of March 16th, I set my phone on the small table beside my bed and turned on the audio recorder before lying down. The rain had returned, softer this time, brushing against the glass in a steady pattern. I left the room dark, letting the faint glow from the streetlights spill across the floor. Sleep came slowly. I remember hearing the refrigerator click on, the occasional car passing outside, and then nothing but the steady sound of rain. At some point in the early hours, I woke up without knowing why. I checked the time, 2:47 a.m., and then noticed the faintest tapping coming from above. Not footsteps, not dragging. It was light, rhythmic, almost like someone tapping a single finger against a wooden surface. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. I stayed still and listened, trying to decide if I was imagining it in that half-awake state. When it stopped, I reached for my phone. The recorder was still running. The next morning, after returning from my shift, I sat at the small kitchen table and listened back to the audio. Most of it was filled with the gentle rain and the quiet hum of the building. But around the 2:46 mark, the tapping started, clear enough that I felt the same heaviness in my chest I'd felt during the night. 3 taps, a pause, then 3 more. And beneath it, so faint it almost blended with the rain, there was something else. A tone, not words, just a soft, muted rise and fall, like someone trying to speak through a wall, but not raising their voice. I replayed it several times before deciding to bring it to the manager the following day. He listened with a polite expression, then shook his head again. He told me no one had access to the apartment above mine except the renovation crew, and they only worked between 8 and 4. He mentioned that the unit was still waiting for electrical checks. No one could stay up there even if they wanted to. His tone wasn't dismissive, He just didn't have any explanation to offer. I thought about asking to move units, even temporarily, but it wasn't an option I could afford. My internship barely covered rent, and transferring apartments meant fees I couldn't manage at the time. I told myself it was just noise from old construction, echoes from the storm, something that would settle once the renovation finished. But that night, when the rain returned and the lights in my apartment dimmed slightly, I found myself staring at the ceiling again, wondering if the sound would come back, wondering if the recorder would capture something new, wondering why, despite all the logical explanations I had repeated to myself, a part of me kept waiting for the next noise. After the dragging sound of previous night, I realized I needed a record, something I could listen to later and compare to my memory. I wasn't trying to prove anything to anyone. I just needed to hear it again to understand it for myself. That night, March 16th, 2018, I set my phone on the small kitchen counter and left the audio recording running before turning off the lights. The apartment was quiet except for the rain brushing softly against the windows and the occasional hum of a heater struggling against the cold. As the hours passed, I drifted in and out of sleep, aware of every small noise. The refrigerator clicking, a car passing on the street below, the faint echo of the wind through the building's corners. Then, sometime just after 2:45 a.m., it started again. The tapping, light, deliberate, and measured, as if someone were testing the surface above the ceiling with a finger. 3 taps, a pause, 3 more. I lay still, listening, trying to convince myself it was nothing, but I couldn't ignore how deliberate it sounded, how steady the rhythm was. And then, beneath the tapping, there was something else. Not words, not a voice in the traditional sense, but a tone, soft and low, rising and falling, almost like someone was trying to speak through the ceiling without raising their voice. It didn't last long, but it was distinct enough to make me hold my breath. The next morning, after finishing a shift at the hospital, I sat at the kitchen table and played back the recording. The gentle rain filled most of it, the usual hum of the building in the background. But at 2:46 a.m., the taps came through clearly, followed by that faint, almost spoken tone. I replayed it several times, trying to catch something I might have missed, trying to find a logical explanation. When I brought the matter to the building manager later that day, he listened politely and shook his head. No one had been inside the apartment above mine for weeks. The renovation crew only worked during the day, and even they had not returned yet. He suggested it might be the building settling, echoes from the storm, something minor, but offered no clear explanation. I thought about moving apartments, but the cost was impossible to manage on an intern salary. The thought of leaving wasn't practical, so I stayed. I told myself it was probably nothing, a coincidence of construction and weather, yet each night, when the rain returned and the lights in my apartment flickered softly, I found myself lying awake, staring at the ceiling, listening, waiting, wondering if the tapping would return. And when it did, I would be ready to record it again. I decided to spend part of the next day in the maintenance office, sifting through the old logs and work orders that had been left behind by previous staff. The office smelled faintly of dust and worn paper, the kind of smell that makes you slow down without noticing. I flipped through reports from the renovation crew who had worked in the unit above mine. One entry, dated just a few days before I had moved in, caught my attention. The crew had recorded that they left early because of unexplained noises in the apartment. Footsteps, scratching, sounds they couldn't account for. Nothing had been damaged, nothing broken, and the logs noted that they had returned during the day only to find everything in order. There was no follow-up explanation, only the quiet remark that they had stopped work for safety reasons. That night, I lay in bed, rain falling softly against the windows, replaying the recordings I had made. Time passed slowly, and around 3:44 a.m., I noticed something strange. Dust fell from the ceiling above me, drifting down in a thin, wavering trail, as if someone was moving, pacing just above my head. My heart wasn't racing, but there was a weight to the moment, a careful stillness that made me aware of every tiny sound. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the window frame, the soft, uneven rhythm of rain on the glass. I watched the dust fall and rise slightly, settling in a pattern that made no sense in an empty apartment. And then, without warning, the ceiling groaned once, just once, as if weight was shifting above me, though I couldn't see a thing. I held my breath, waiting for the next sound, but nothing came. The room stayed quiet, except for the rain and the gentle hum of the building around me. That single groan, that small shift, lingered in my mind far longer than any explanation I could give it. I was given permission to enter the apartment above mine a few days later. The key felt heavier than I expected as I held it in my hand, and the hallway leading to the door seemed longer, quieter than I remembered. When I opened it, the room was empty. Sunlight filtered through the partially covered windows, revealing a floor coated in a thin layer of dust, undisturbed, like a surface waiting for something to happen. I stepped inside carefully, making sure not to leave marks of my own. My eyes scanned the room slowly, following the contours of the space, noticing the corners, the walls, the ceiling that had echoed the strange sounds for weeks. And then I saw it, a path in the dust that had been disturbed, leading from the doorway to a corner of the apartment. Foot-shaped patterns, faint but unmistakable, like someone had walked there repeatedly, tracing the same path without ever leaving the room. Each step was careful, deliberate, aligned with the rhythm I had heard from below. In the far corner, I noticed a small indentation on the floor, a shallow impression that suggested someone had stood there for long periods. No furniture had been moved. Nothing had been left behind. Just that quiet mark, a presence felt without being seen. I ran my hand lightly over the floor, careful not to disturb it further, and stared at the faint outline of the dust path. It matched the sounds I had recorded and the moments I'd spent lying awake, listening to the ceiling. And in that instant, I returned to the detail that had started this whole sequence. The sound from a night I first heard it, unaccounted for, unexplained, and yet clearly tied to this space. This was the detail no one has ever been able to explain, the single trace that refused any ordinary answer, the one piece that kept me awake long after I left the apartment and long after the building settled back into its quiet rhythm. I eventually moved out of that apartment, leaving behind the quiet floors, the thin layer of dust, and the ceiling that had carried the sounds I could never fully explain. The building itself was renovated some time later. Workers replaced floors, patched walls, and updated the electrical systems. Even so, reports continued. Brief mentions from those who spent time in the building after the work was done. Footsteps, tapping, subtle noises that seemed to follow the same rhythm I had recorded, the same presence I'd felt above me. I don't visit that part of the city anymore, and I don't know whether those noises have faded entirely or simply wait for someone new to hear them. But some spaces, I've come to understand, hold on to what passed through them in ways that are quiet but persistent. They leave traces that ordinary senses cannot always account for. And sometimes, if the night is still enough and the rain presses softly against the windows, that memory presses down through the ceiling and becomes something you can almost feel even when no one is there to see it. I remember that evening, the sound of the rain on the windows, the soft hum of the building around me, and the faint impressions left in dust. And I remember thinking, long after I had packed my bags and closed the door behind me, that some parts of a place are never truly empty. They keep the passage of time and those who pass through it quietly, with patience, waiting for someone to notice.